Hey gang, Kevin here, Life22, and just wanted to go over with you a book that I finished last week, and I'm actually almost done with the next book. I was really excited to finish this book, and I should have done it in two. Well, maybe I could have gotten away with not doing it in two parts, and we're going to try that right now. But there did seem to be a lot that we could cover with this book. So this one is Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. So this is his, I believe he did Maps of Meaning first and then 12 Rules for Life. And this is the Beyond Order one. And it's, I'm going to say, like, out of all the influential people in my life and the people that I've learned from, I want to say, like, the hierarchy goes Jordan Peterson, and then Thomas Sowell, the great economist who should have won a Nobel Peace Prize for economics. And then it's Dennis Prager. And then you know what I mean, I haven't solidified. Those are the top three, though. I mean, and, you know, I'm not even 35 yet, so I've got some... it's funny that, like, you know, out of the influential people in your life, and every time I read something of his or I listen to something of his, it moves me. I feel like I grow. I evolved 10 years, and it's just it's pretty good. So he has 12 more rules for life. Let's see here, chapters. 12 more rules for life. He does a great job with the dedication and a note from the author in the time of the pandemic. So he's trying to, he wanted to make this book timeless. He kind of talks about that in the the prequel or the overture about he dedicates this to his wife Tammy and his family, and he wants to say, hey, I want to make this book timeless in the pre-overture. So yeah. So and then he talks about how, like, he wants his book to be timeless regardless of the pandemic, right? Like, it influences the book. He was in the middle of writing this book when the pandemic hit, and then through the pandemic and all of this health trials and tribulations, it was all covered in the overture and prior to past the opening credits. So, it's, nice little, like, sentiment from the author, which is just is good. So I made some different notes and thoughts that I thought were good to hit on. So rule 1 for this book was do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievement. And what he discusses in this portion of the book, I mean, this rule is, to all those young people nowadays, right, that just say, screw organized religion, screw school, you know what I mean? And they kind of just have this rage against mentality, right? They want to rage against the man and the structure and all that other stuff. And then he kind of points out that they exist for a reason. So don't full-heartedly fall. You don't have to full-heartedly fall for each of the institutions, but don't just go willy-nilly denigrating them because you're rebelling against the thing, right? So, if you weren't raised religious, don't downgrade religion just because you weren't exposed to it. Doesn't mean that it's all nonsense. It must have existed at some point or another for a reason. And also, but there are issues with the system, right? Like bureaucracies and things like that. Where, and in one of the sub chapters of the first rule, there are the subsections of the first rule. He has a topic called Top Dog, and he says people that are the best at solving the problem should rise to the top. This is not power. That is not power. That is the authority that properly accompanies the ability. So he kind of talks about, like, how everybody wants to tear down the guy at the top because they're just there for power. And a lot of times, if there's a climate, meteors hailing towards Earth, right? You're like in the movie Deep Impact or Armageddon, right? You don't like listen to the bureaucrat, right? You don't listen to the guy who is like, you don't listen to the president, right? You like that is the decision making power, but you should kind of like in that instance you should rely heavily on the person who is most qualified to answer the question or solve the problem, right? Like the pandemic, for example, everybody leaned on Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Fauci's not, you know, he just happened to be the bureaucrat at the top of it who had been named the head of the NIH and things like that. Wasn't really, you know, the world's best virologist. Just because you happen to be the most senior person on a team doesn't mean that you're the best, especially in a government institution. That doesn't, you know. So kind of similar situation there where the top dog, so what he's saying is that the top dog, the person who moves to the top of the pecking order, really depends on the problem at hand, and it should alternate. And what happens with people in a typical struggle for power is people rise to the top and they don't want to give it up. And there's a lot of people that should just rise to the top naturally that should handle it. And it was very very cool, like little insight on his insight on how you know how social structures in general work. Pecking order of chickens per se, you know. Which is, it's just, so don't denigrate, don't carelessly denigrate, do not carelessly denigrate social institutions or creative achievements. Rule number 2, imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. So set a goal for yourself, right? Like that's pretty self-explanatory rule to life, right? Set a goal for yourself. And then he kind of breaks it down into all these little subcompartments of each rule, right? So like, who are you? Who could you be? The emergence of the unforgettable. Materia prima, who could you be? Polytheism and monotheism and the emergence of a virtuous hero. Hero, dragon, death, rebirth, who you could be, part 3, you know, how to act, and those are just the different things that kind of like help you set that goal and achieve that goal and aim single-mindedly at that, right? Like you're watching a story, you're watching a TV show, right? And they have like the plot of the episode is a sub-story, but like the main story, like there's a main story and then there's like a little sub story that you get stuck in, and then, you know, towards the end of the episode they kind of fulfill another little key piece to the main story of the television show or whatever you're watching. And that's your single-mindedness, right? That's the part like that you should kind of like step yourself back at a certain point, look at like the overall goals and achievements of your life and say, this is the direction I'm heading in. And then there's all these little stories along the way as you're traveling in that direction. And that's kind of with the single-mindedness, right? Because you're not going above that, right? Like, it's hard for any of us to go multi-generational with something because you don't exist outside of your generation. You can envision it, but it's not really something that you have a grasp on the control of, because now you're constituting that you're controlling others. And I'm going down a rabbit hole, sorry. But in the polytheism into monotheism section, the careless demolition of tradition is the invitation for the reemergence of chaos. When ignorance destroys culture, monsters will emerge. So in that section he talks about the ebbs and flows of just what like different monotheisms and stuff like that have created, and to tell us a story of things that have come, and they write it in such a way that it becomes this timeless story. And so right there he just kind of quickly describes that, how the careless demolition of tradition, right? So that's happening nowadays, right? We're seeing a reemergence of that. So we're demolishing tradition, right? We're trying to destroy the fabric of what the definition of words are, right? Like, what's the definition of marriage? And then we go to make it all inclusive. We say, it starts out as marriage is this thing between a man and a woman. And then we expand it to mean this. And then eventually it just means, like, just two people that are roommates or married. You know what I mean? And, like, they don't even have to be having, they don't have to be, like, copulating. Copulating? Yeah, anyways. And so the careless demolition of tradition is the invitation for the reemergence of chaos, because once you start destroying an institution or something that is, sometimes you have to throw something out, right? Like, you've got a car and it needs more repairs than it's just a few tweaks and whatever. Or you have a house, right? And the foundation's now crumbling, right? And sometimes it's easier to bulldoze the house and build anew. But a lot of times you can't forget why the old house crumbled, right? What was wrong with the foundation that could have been corrected? So telling the story about that, right? So completely, like, just starting anew, like, you don't have to be religious to understand the story of, be mindful, do certain things, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of different things you could take from religion that affect your life in generations before you have kind of boiled down to this essence of something that, like, you could spend multiple lifetimes trying to discover, and they've done it for you. So just to kind of disregard that is, and so, like, but by disregarding that, by destroying traditions that have created something that kind of gave stability to your world, if you don't have stability and order, essentially, if you don't have order, the opposite of that is chaos. So, so the reemergence of chaos. When ignorance destroys culture, monsters will emerge. That is, like, without order, you have chaos. Chaos is monsters, right? Just from a primitive approach, chaos, institutions are culture, right? That is stability, that's order, that's, you will do this, you do that, you do this, you do that, you live a happy life, right? That's the diktats of most traditions and cultures. So if you start to destroy the culture, you create a void, and you can't have an absence. You can't have a void filled with nothing. It just doesn't exist, right? We could talk about the philosophy of nothingness, but nothingness doesn't exist. It just doesn't. You don't, like, my hand is here, and now it's over here. It essentially, where my hand is not, is air. It's being displaced. And where air is not, my hand is in this situation. So, where order is, chaos is not. Once you remove order, the void is created and filled with chaos. That's what he's getting at. It's very, very kind of deep right there. I like that. That covers Rule 2. Rule 3, do not hide unwanted things in the fog. I loved this. This section alone, and it was one of his subsections. So let's go through the sections here real quick. Do not hide unwanted things in the fog. Those damned plates. So he kind of described, doing the dishes, and how they can lead to fights and things like that. And just not worth the fight is another subsection. Corruption, commission, and omission. What is the fog? Events and memories. The what is the fog part spoke to me a lot. It kind of describes. What is the fog? Describe. Oh, okay. Well, it's a note for me to describe to you. So the fog is this thing that you're just not addressing, right? Like, you wanna argue with a loved one, or you have a problem that you won't address. You have a problem you won't address. You won't face something, whether it's a communication barrier, whether it's a problem with you that you won't dissect, whether it's a problem with somebody else that bothers you, which in essence is your problem, right? If something bothers you, it is your problem. We talked about this in a previous podcast or review of a book. If you have a problem and it eats at you, it is your problem, right? Something, so you don't like how the school is being run, and it bothers you, and it bothers you to the point that you say something and you talk to other people about it. It is your problem. And if you don't do anything about it, and somebody else does, that was your fault because you let somebody else do it. You delegated your responsibility to them, and that's kind of what this is. So the fog is this haze where it's unfamiliar territory to you. You're putting it out of your mind, in a sense, and not handling it. The problem is, monsters live in the fog. Things that you chase dragons and monsters, right? Where you're supposed to chase them. But if you don't, and you ignore them, they live in the fog, and they grow. And they get bigger. To the point that they can come out of the fog on their own and devour you, in a metaphorical sense. If you don't want the monsters to devour you, you must clear the fog and pull you must clear the fog, and you have to pull and fight the dragons that you've left there, right? So don't leave unwanted things in the fog. Just because you don't want something doesn't mean that you don't have to address it. If you have a personal problem, a lot of this is mental stuff. Sometimes they could be physical problems that you have that you don't want to address, right? Like sometimes your physical problems that you don't want to address are manifestations of your mental problems you don't want to address. You have a pile of laundry. You have a pile of dishes. Then you ignore those problems, and then you have a cluttered home, and then your house gets filthy, and the sweeping can't be done because of the clutter, and you won't clean the clutter. And now you can't sweep. Now you can't vacuum. Your dishes build up. Now you have no place for the new dirty dishes, and you end up eating on paper plates, and then you're throwing those away. And it's still, I don't want to take, and it's almost a symptom of depression, if you will, and you don't feel the will or the energy to even take the garbage out, and then it snowballs, and that's the monsters, the dragons manifesting themselves and coming out into the light, coming out of the fog, and drastically affecting your life. And so if you won't address the problem, which is why I can't do the dishes, why I can't handle this problem, why don't I see it as a problem? Now, obviously, this negates, people that you live with that would do the dishes, for example. I think he points out spousal issues. He points out a whole bunch of different things that, because every scenario is different, right? But like just assuming you're living alone in this situation, you have somebody else bothering you about the dishes, and eventually it builds up, and then you become like, it doesn't come to light till you have a guest come over and say, "What is this mess?" And a lot of times the mess that is in front of you is a manifestation of the mess that's in your brain, the mess that's in your head, that some organization that has to happen. It's very therapeutic to clean your house, to organize your drawers, to organize your cupboards. It's very therapeutic because by doing that, it's just like writing. It organizes your thoughts. By organizing the cleanliness and order of your home, you're organizing the cleanliness and order of your mind. It is just a very deep, I could talk for days on the fog. It was very good. A must listen. If you have the book and you only have, I think it's 16 minutes, 11 minutes and 27 seconds. If you only have enough time to just listen to that section, boom, it's good stuff. So, jumping on to Rule 4. All right. Notice the opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. We just briefly touched on this. So let's make yourself invaluable. Responsibility and meaning. Rescue your father, Osiris and Horus, and he talks about that story. So I guess let's just kind of pick this apart. So where you've abdicated responsibility, it is, if you have a problem, it's your responsibility to solve your problem. It's nobody else's. It's you. You need to take self-ownership. You need to have agency. You need to have self-worth to be able to go forth and handle your own problems. You have a problem with the school board, you run for school. You run for the school board. You could be a thorn in their side. You could write newspaper articles. You could have a blog. You could talk about anything. But wherever you have a problem and you don't deal with it, you've abdicated your responsibility. And somebody else, like a monster, will come along. I'm just saying these people are like monsters. They can come along and gobble up your responsibility. And with your responsibility, they gain power. So now they have power over you because they've taken your responsibility away from you to solve your own problem. Now, you could call them your enemy, you could call them whatever, but you've abdicated it. You can't leave a sandwich in the park and not expect someone to take it. You didn't put a free sign on it, you didn't have your name on it, but it's a free sandwich. You left it in the park. You abdicated that sandwich, and now somebody else has your sandwich. And guess what? You're getting hungry. And when that hunger gets bad enough, you come back and take back your sandwich. And is what you need to do. So he kind of says, make yourself invaluable. He talks about you. But then responsibility and meaning, he kind of gets into that a little bit. Like, what is your responsibility? The meaning of that. Why? And there's something beyond all of us that eats at us. Why does it eat at you and not me? Why does it eat at me and not you? Why does something bother you that calls... Why does something bother both of us, maybe? And I go do it. Something calls me to do it, and I listen to the call, and I say, you know what, screw it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to clear my schedule. I'm going to go handle that. And you, on the other hand, or maybe the roles are reversed, abdicate your responsibility. You say, I'm just going to bitch about it on Facebook, and that's about it. I'm not going to handle it. I'm not going to do it. That becomes your pride. What is that thing that has a grasp on me that we both had a calling for that bothered us? And it was strong enough to me to, maybe it's my convictions, maybe it's the hold that this desire calling has on me over you. Maybe mine is greater or yours is greater, or what happens to be that one of us abdicates over the other. Then he talks about rescue your father, and he kind of gets into the Pinocchio battle, right? He's brought this up before, and I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. He describes how kind of Pinocchio is a very kind of ancient-esque story about how you should act to go from being a boy to a man. And at the end of the day, you need to save your father from the belly of the whale, the belly of the beast. But in the meantime, on your journey, do not act an ass, or you'll become one. And your life will be suffering and working in the salt mines, and because you're an ass. Or, and then at the end of it, you must save your father. You must be righteous, and you must save your father, which is symbolic of the generations before you, right? It's not just a boy, a male's tale, right? It's you must conquer issues that generations before you could not conquer. You must save them. My father was an alcoholic. It did him in. I'm conscious of that. I'm aware of it. I pick 3 months out of the year where I don't drink. I also know that he was afflicted by laziness, and I see it in me. And in essence, by me not doing it, I'm saving my father from the belly of the beast. Now, maybe I could have physically saved him from his afflictions, or maybe by me learning my lesson, it has saved me from becoming my father and being the trapped man in the whale or in the beast. It's one of those. It's deep. It's deep. I just the kids just watched Pinocchio a week ago. It was I could explain to them the lesson about don't be a jackass, and not in little kid terms, right? Don't be a donkey, or you'll become one. It's terrifying, and it scares little kids, as it should, because all good lessons should scare you straight, if you will. It should scare you onto the straight and narrow. It should form you, right? That's why horrible things happen to the bad guys at the end. That's why Hans Gruber falls off the Nakatomi Tower. That's why Jafar is banished into the lamp for a millennia, right? That's why Jabba the Hutt is shot and then falls into the giant... I can't even remember the name of the worm that just spends 1,000 years devouring you. I don't know how that keeps you alive for 1,000 years. You probably die of old age before, or starvation, or suffocation before it finally finished digesting you. But, so anyways. And who that might be, happiness and responsibility pick up the extra weight. So pick up that slack. Pick up that wherever weight is. Pick up that extra responsibility. Jump into rule 5. Do not do what you hate. So if you hate something, don't do it. Now, there's certain things that you have to do, right? Like maybe you tell yourself that you hate working out, but physical exercise is good for you, and but just if you get stuck in a rut, you hate doing this every single day, and every single day you do it. It's not a healthy thing that you do. It's just, you go into a room and somebody yells at you at work, and then you leave that room, and then the next day the same thing happens. Why would you do that? It's just going to lead to you kind of self-denigrating yourself. So pathological order in its day-to-day guise. Fortify your position. Practicalities. And then here's rule 6, which kind of leads into, because rule 1 is a double-edged sword, right? Don't denigrate institutions, social institutions. But then rule 6 is abandon ideology. And it's not so much religion. He kind of describes, one of the things that's easy to understand is when you get older, you get set in your ways. Maybe you're trained to believe something, right? So for the kids that are carelessly denigrating institutions like religion, most of the ones that are doing that were never raised in a religion in particular, and maybe they were raised that religion isn't important or whatever. That in and of itself is an ideology. So don't denigrate them, but at the same time, don't be so blinded by your ideology that you can't see something new. You were trained one way. It's hard for you to open your eyes to a different path. And so sometimes it's easy to abandon ideology in your blindness, and that's kind of one way of looking at it. So he gets into his subchapters, the wrong places. Perhaps he is only sleeping. The fatal attraction of the false idol. And it's easy to be blinded and just follow yourself down a path, and something that looks like the mirage you've been walking towards is there, and it's not real. It's not resentment. And then there's resentment that builds in with that. Where are we? Work as hard as you can. Work as hard as you possibly can on at least one thing and see what happens. So, and this is broken up into the value of heat and pressure, the worst decision of all, discipline, unity, dogma, and spirit. And he kind of talks about the plumber. He just says, the person that has, I'm trying to think. Yeah. He talks about how, and there was some really good parts about this where he describes that, like, all of a sudden you become a plumber, for example, and you are able to make a good living, and you enjoy what you do, and you're learning more and more about your field, and then eventually you are able to train more people to become plumbers, and you're solving more of life's problems, and what you are doing. I could have sworn I wrote this down. I could have sworn I did, but the harder you're working at that, I know I wrote this down somewhere. I feel like maybe it was Jesus. Oh well. The harder you work at that, no. I remember him talk. Oh, that's why I talked about. That's why I wrote it down. I talked about this in one of. I bet I can pull it up. Sorry, folks. It's not on there. It's on. I left it as a note. I can pull it up on my phone way quicker than I can do it on there. He on his tour to Australia, it was his Beyond Order tour, and he talked about different rules and different trips. Depth, meaning, and work. It was when he was in Perth. Okay. There is infinite depth everywhere, and so you can concentrate on doing one thing as well as you can, and what that will do is make you a better person, and it will at the same time make the world a better place. I don't think there's any limit to the degree in which that is true. That is deep. So I knew I made a note about it. I just couldn't remember where I put it. It was one of the ones I made by hand because I remember writing it on this type of paper, but I moved it to digital notes and I stored the physical note away. But you become that plumber, and then you train other people to become plumbers, and you create a good plumbing business, and then you're able to, help that little old lady out who needs plumbing, because you're not doing it for the money anymore, because you don't need the money. You're providing tons of people with jobs, skills, training, being helpful to the community by providing said services. You're giving back to the community. You are doing all these different things. Obviously, you have to be a good person for that. There are bigger entities. And I know some people in the plumbing industry is a bad one in our community anyways, that there's a few bad eggs that will go out of their way to make extra money by deceiving little old ladies. But that's here nor there. But what he points out is he's just using this as an example, and then what you're doing is the more you go, obviously you are not on an infinite timeline. You are at a stifled timeline, but the further you can push that, the more infinite of good you can start to achieve. And the infinite possibilities are just that, they are infinite. And there's something really to be said about that. So going into rule 8. Switch back over. Workers possibly can on just one thing, see what happens. So I think we went over this. Oh yeah, we didn't go over the subchapters yet. So the value of heat and pressure. No, we did. You dogma. Okay, there we go. Yeah. Rule 9. Oh wait, no. Rule 8 is try to make one room in your home as beautiful as possible. The first subset of that is cleaning your room is not enough, which is one of the rules, I believe, in the first book, which is clean your room, make your bed. That's memory and vision, the land you know, the land you do not know, and the land you cannot, something or other. One room, and not just decorations. So clean the room. It helps you with your memory, your vision. We kind of briefly talked about this, right? To organize your mind is to, make sure, and one room at a time. Just pick one room, and it's helpful. I mean, because before you know it, one cluttery room clutters more rooms. And don't just tackle the whole house at once. Try to take your time. Just like therapy, it takes time. You can't just go and tackle something. Sometimes the motivation to just go and rip that Band-Aid off, pull your sword out of its sheath, fight that dragon, that can be a snap decision. And sometimes it has to be. But to tackle the entire project, don't blow off of work to go clean a room, but be mindful. A few minutes a day. That's all it takes, right? A few pennies a day, right? Which is a good one. And let's see here. Oh, memory and vision. So slow down to see beauty. Segue to adult responsibilities and missing the present. So this was very good. This portion right here, the memory and vision, that spoke to me. And he talked about how he was a young father, and how he missed out the responsibilities of being a father, and thinking about the future and his adult responsibilities was causing him to miss the present. And he remembers going to a park with his wife and young kids, and he describes how the things that concerned him at that time were, there were so many responsibilities on his shoulders, that he wanted, everything annoyed him, right? Like the kids in the room annoyed him. And I could relate to that, being self-employed for a large portion of the younger years of my father, being a father, where like, I don't have time to go push these kids on the swing. They have food and financial needs and things that I have to buy, and I can't buy them things at the park. I can't make money at them. And so there's something that very, very much spoke to me. So you take that economic decision because you're consumed by it, to forego time with your kids, to go to work, to be able to pay for your kids. It's something that after it's over, you can grapple with it, but you don't realize it's going on until it's going on, and you know that you should be resenting the time that you can't be with your family to go and work and earn money so that you can afford to keep your family with fresh, warm clothes in a nice, warm house with hot meals. And that sacrifice that you have to make, and he talks about that, where he was his wife couldn't understand what was going on, and I could relate to that a lot. His wife couldn't understand why he was kind of distant. And it wasn't that he was distant, it was that because he was preoccupied, because he had this memory, and he was on a mission, this vision. He was like, my job is to provide for these kids. And it wasn't until he got older and he kind of broke free of that, if you will, that he learned that he had to go down that path, which we all do, but he could step back and enjoy the moments that he could. And he kind of just says, slow down to see the beauty. You don't have time to look at the sunset. You don't have time to see how beautiful your kid is swinging on a swing as their eyes glisten with absolute joy from being a child. Just, it really rang true. Like, how many times that, I wasn't the stay-at-home parent. I didn't get to go to the park every day. I wish I could. But then again, like, you know what I mean? It's just, I had a responsibility. It was, and it's not just me trying to justify it to myself. It's also, if you could do it over, where would you be if you had abdicated that responsibility and spent those moments with them? Sure, they never, who knows? Because the financial responsibility is still not something that you can abdicate. So it's not like, I don't know. There's something to be said about it. There's a lot that you can have that internal struggle with yourself, how you would have done it better. Because once you figure that out, then you can give advice to your children when you see it happening to them. And it is what it is. Maybe it's just slow down a little bit. You can work a little more later. Maybe that's the advice. Maybe that's the gem. That's the diamond in the rough, right? So, we're got 4 more rules left. So anyways, he briefly talks about art in this book as well. And in this section, he talks about art, and I think it's really, really cool. He talks about how beautiful art is and what it captures and what it means to everybody. Kind of like how that little excerpt there from the previous section kind of captured me, right? And art does that in so many ways to a wider span of people. And he talks about how we have like all this art crammed into like little buildings or even big buildings, and he's like, some pieces of art need whole buildings just dedicated to them because it's just such a beautiful piece of art. And it made me actually go like start looking at art more. This is just to try to look for a deeper meaning in things and try to like make a connection with something, look for something that speaks to me and utilize that to kind of describe and express myself in my own home. He also says, he uses that as I believe in one of his talks, he talks about using art as a negotiation tool as well. Something that speaks to you in art is speaking to you, might not speak to others, and you have to find that happy balance between this is a home for 2 people. Right, a husband and a wife, and kids, and you hang up the kids' art while they're young, but you find things to, like, this is a piece of art that I like. This is one that I like. Well, you have too much art, so let's try to find a happy medium. I don't like the art that you like, and then where can we place these things so that we compromise, right? And you can use this art to kind of decorate your home, express yourself not just personally, but together. And it's a very cool tool that I thought was awesome. That spoke to me as well. Rule 9: if old memories still upset you, write them down carefully and completely. And he talks about that. Let's see here. He talks about that, and that's part of the therapy, right? Something that bothers you, you should write it down, and then it allows you to organize your thoughts because you're communicating it. Now you're not communicating out loud. A lot of people don't like to talk, so maybe you write it down. You write it down, and it helps you communicate. And once you communicate, that's how we organize in our brains, right? So writing is organizing your thoughts, right? So in order to have a nice sound mind where you understand all the things that are in it and how it's organized and all this other stuff, you need to write your ideas down completely. Then maybe rewrite it, because that'll allow you to start kind of churning this process. It's like butter. You're just churning this milk into butter. So he breaks it down with, but is yesterday finished with you? The lessons to pull from the past. Do not fall twice in the same pit, right? Don't make the same mistake twice. Possessed by a ghost. Why does something keep possessing you? Something from the past, right? The ghost, right? Uncomprehended malevolence. Potential inactuality. The word as savior. So he really just kind of talks about a lot of these different things. So then you jump over to Rule 10. Plan and work diligently to maintain the romance in your relationship. And he kind of talks about how now these are rules for sharing your life with somebody else. And he broaches on what he talked about in his 3-part excerpt on marriage. But he talks about, how it's important to understand the other person in your life, and like, you need to mature, grow up, and learn to negotiate these things. Learn to dance, if you will. And he uses dancing a lot to explain you're dancing your life with somebody else. Life isn't fun if you're just dancing by yourself. So, The Unbearable Date, Bedrock, Christ in the Candle, Negotiation, Tyranny, or Slavery, the domestic economy, finally, romance, and he kind of breaks down relationships. It's really good, and different rules to just avoid, right? He's the one that set us on the kids' book that we read to the kids. There's No Such Thing as Dragons by Jack Hill, I think. Anyways, and actually what spoke to me was the domestic economy. So that was that segment there. It's 13 minutes and 58 seconds. That one was really good. We all have stories to tell, and our partners have them to hear. And our partners have to hear them. So if you don't tell your story, your partner never hears it, and it starts to denigrate your relationship. And what he talks about is, hey, like, you need an hour and a half to talk 90 minutes every week. You need to have a discussion with this person. And it doesn't have to be all at once. 15 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, twice a week, 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week, you got your 90 minutes in, right? But you have to do it, because anything less than that, you're working backwards, because now you got to play catch up the next week. Now you need 100. You only did 60 this week. You got to do 120 next week. And if you don't do it, you eventually start actually devolving your relationship. And he talks about that, and it makes so much sense. And I want to say that's people communicating is one of the hard. People think they're doing it on the internet. They're not really communicating. They're speaking their grievances, and it's all just them talking to a wall. Other people see it, but they're not getting the true. They're not getting the optical reception from other people. They're not getting exact dialogue, and it's that dialogue has its mental cues that we all go by, and it allows us to hone our ideas and at least speak our pieces, but also have them acknowledged. And that's and relationships are built on that. And people nowadays don't communicate, and then everything devolves, and then no wonder there's divorces rampant. Kids are born in single parent households, and no one's willing to work things out because no one's communicating. It's really quite sad. Rule 11. Do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. That's a good rule, right? And that's broken up into the story is the thing, the eternal character of the human drama, nature, creation and destruction, culture, security and tyranny, the individual, hero and adversary, resentment, deceit and arrogance, the existential danger of arrogance and deceit, the place you should be. Those are, like, in each one of those, I mean, we're talking, like, they're like 10 minutes a pop. Like, some of them, there's a couple that are 25, but they're like 10 to 15 minutes a pop. Some of them are like 6 minutes. There's a 2.5 in here. And they're just little excerpts that just kind of get his point across in small little subjects that make up the whole chapter, the whole rule, and the guidelines, the pathway in which you can maneuver through these 12 rules. 12 simple rules to live by, right? Some people live by 10 rules. They're called commandments. He's giving you simple, broken down rules. He's formulated across religions. It's real, and he's a clinical psychologist, so he knows more about us. He'll probably die knowing more about how we work than we will scratch the surface at, which is, like I said, I feel like I'm 10 years. I feel like every time I read one of his books, I gain 10 years in maturity, because I can't fathom how he's gained all this knowledge. And the more I read his stuff, the more I understand what he's talking about, and it's amazing. Going into rule 12, be grateful in spite of your suffering. Now, this is a good one. So, down can define up. Mephistophelian spirit, courage, but superordinate love. Coda. Oh, coda's the end. Okay, so coda is what he used to end his chapters with in, like, Maps of Meaning. So it's kind of in summation, and then his ending credits. But so be grateful in spite of your. Don't Don't sit there and woe is me, this is that. You're giving up your agency. I can't do this because of this. And no, you should be grateful for everything in your life in spite of the suffering that you've been put through by life, because life has put all of us through suffering to some degree or another. All of us have suffering that have caused vices and caused obstacles in our lives that we have to overcome. Life's a tough bitch, man. Sometimes life will come along and she'll take your kids from you, right? A tragic accident takes your kids. It's a horrible thing. And in spite of that, you should still be grateful to be alive, to have had those kids, to have loved those kids, to do those things. You come across somebody, and I believe this is the support that he talks about, that you, and maybe it was in the Beyond Order tour that he had going through Australia and California. It was Dennis Prager had mentioned that some of the people in his life, and that's why I'm relating this, because these two people are very relatable, but Dennis Prager pointed out that some of the most fascinating people, some of the people that you never thought had a wicked story, had such suffering in their life, you could never tell. You could never tell. Because they overcame it. They learned the lessons that life was going to give them. They were still gracious people. It's almost like the harder your suffering is, the more this rule rings true and resonates with you. So if you're bitching about what little problems life's thrown your way, maybe it's because life hasn't made you suffer enough. That could be the takeaway from this. You're just overcoming little anthills, and you're never going to understand what true suffering is. There's always somebody who suffered more than you. Don't throw pity parties. Your suffering isn't anything special. Just be grateful. That's the rule 12. That's a good rule too. They're all good. It's a great book. Highly recommend it. This was a long review. I probably kept you folks here for like an hour, but it was good. It was good. It was a great book. I highly recommend it. Jordan Peterson, he's the man. I gotta give it to Jordan. He's more intelligent than I will ever be. At least than I'll ever think that I'll be. Who knows? I might continue to follow this path and come across it. And then again, what is intelligence? But for somebody to discover all this stuff by doing the research that he's done, it's phenomenal. It's fascinating, this stuff. I think he's wrote a fourth book. This is his fourth book, I believe. I've only read 3 of them. I only thought there was 3. So I have to hunt down the other one. And I mean, I catch most of his lecture tours and most of his book tours. I missed going to the Beyond Order book tour in Canada this beginning of this month. Just the cards didn't play their hand. Oh well. I got to watch them. I'm a Daily Wire subscriber, so I have all of his content at my fingertips. Besides having to, buy the books on Audible. But I mean, he's phenomenal. So highly recommend it. Even if you can't afford it this time, hop on, catch some of the YouTube lectures. They're still on there. They're free, I believe. So thanks, guys. We'll catch you soon with the next book review, and or I'm sure we'll have something spicy coming up. So